This is a tutorial video on how to do peer grading in the manufacturing class. Now, the peer grading for our CAD work is done on a form that looks just like this. The only thing that might change is how many peers and how many objects we have, but it should always look like this. The 5 criteria that we grade don't change. They're very consistent throughout the entire class. You can see here they are labeled 1 through 5. And we're just going to go down the list and see how well the object that we are grading adheres to what it's supposed to look like and what the dimensions are supposed to be or what is given. This first set of problems is 6 geometric shapes that we are sketching and extruding. And the information that we are grading against is right here. You can see there's some dimensions, and then there's a bunch of constraints. And we're not really going to be grading the constraints. We're just going to be looking for, is the object fully constrained, and does it adhere to the dimensions? That's kind of all we're looking for. Different constraints can be used to achieve the same result is the best way to explain why. We also do need to make sure that the dimensions include the sketch dimensions and the 3D dimensions. In this case, it's going to be the extrude. And then this is how the final product should be oriented, which is also one of these. It's our number 3 or our third grading criteria. So let's look at the object that we're talking about here. So this is the object. This is just how I opened it up. If this were another student's work, I sat down and this is what I'm seeing. Let's look at the first thing, which is all sketches and features must have correct dimensions. So let's look at the sketch. If I double click it, I can open it up, and then I can look at these 2 dimensions and see if they adhere to the example I was given, which I can see right off the bat they don't. One of them is correct, one of them is wrong. So that is number 1 has a problem. So for object 1, or actually this is object 6, we're going to put a number 1 because there's a problem with that first grading criteria. The second grading criteria is, are all sketches fully constrained? Well, let's look at that. Now there's 2 ways to check if it's fully constrained. In a sketch, I can look down here at the bottom and it says 1 dimension needed. If this is fully constrained, it says it right there. Also, if you look on the browser, there will be a push pin here right next to the sketch and that little square if it is fully constrained. So that tells us there's a problem with the second criteria. The third criteria is correct orientation in perfect isometric view, which is a 3D view at the home position. So that sounds complicated, but come up here to the view cube, hit the home button, get out of the sketch too, hit the home button, and whatever you see here should match what you see on the right on this. And it doesn't, so that's a problem. Now, these are all relatively easy fixes, but we're not grading the fix, we're grading the work that we see. Number 4 is all temporary features should be invisible. Now, that sounds complicated, but this sketch, you guys notice that there's all these purple lines? Because this sketch that was done is visible. That should be invisible. This sketch is under the extrude, and there are times when we're building where we want it visible, but when we're done and saved and turning this in, it should be invisible, which is basically a toggle off and on. Now I just changed it, but we don't change other people's work. So that is, we're going to mark that as incorrect. And the last one is minimal sketches should be used. When we're beginning in CAD, a lot of people will create new sketches and only use, one of them essentially. So here I have 2 sketches, sketch 2 and 3, which I'm toggling, and there's nothing there. All there is a dot indicating the sketch, but there's no work. So those are extra sketches. Now, those are very, very easy to delete, but it's not my job. It's not your job to modify someone else's work. You're just telling them what's wrong with it. So over here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that need to be addressed in this object. Now, those are all pretty simple fixes. Honestly, another 5 minutes, and that person could have, instead of 0 points, could have all 5 points. But the most important part here is we're learning what is wrong, what we need to correct, and how we need to get better at CAD. So that's an example of how I would go about grading and then how we mark this grade. Now, when we're totaling up points, what we do is we count up the numbers that we put. We don't add them up. We just count how many numbers we put for all the objects involved, which, let's say object 1 through 5 were perfect and they're blank because they were perfect, because there was no deficiencies. But object 6 had 5 deficiencies. Well, 30 minus 5 is 25. And then for this average column, all we do is add up the scores that everyone gave us and divide it by 4 in this case, because there were 4 graders, me and 3 peers. So that would be the average. This is just to give us a better idea of how we're doing as a whole, because sometimes different graders will have different opinions and can come up with different scores. It shouldn't be that way, but it kind of is, because human nature is part of it. I also look at that to see if there's anybody that's way off in their grading and needs to have another supplemental little class. But that is how we grade going forward.